Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our Fireside Chat. I'm Pallavi Adi, the co-founder of Asian Pathfinders, along with Satish Dua. This entire month in July, we've been doing different sessions on, on issues related to extremism, violent extremism, terrorism related issues. And today's session is on evolution of countering and preventing violent extremism strategies over the last decade. We have two amazing speakers and an amazing moderator. So I'll not take a lot of your time. I'll just do a brief introduction about Asian Pathfinders. So we started in 2020. We are a knowledge sharing platform. We hold fireside chats and dialogues where we bring scholars, practitioners, academics together for a constructive dialogue. We are an informal forum, so we always welcome feedback from the community. Like I said, the session on 29th of July will be the last session on the series on violent extremism. So it's related to conceptualizing terrorism from regional perspectives. We have scholars from West Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, as well as Central Asia, who will be giving their perspectives on the terrorism-related issues in their region. It's a panel discussion. It's on a Thursday in the evening. It's a dialogue. So we will be sharing the link in the chat section. You can always register if you're interested. And in the month of August, we are doing a series on non-traditional security threats. So please keep an eye on our social media to know more about it. So guidelines, first and foremost, please request everyone to be on mute unless you're the speaker or the moderator, because we do record these sessions and put it on YouTube. And then obviously, these are a lot of times emotive issues. We have our own strong opinions, but please let's engage in a constructive and mature discussion. So please put in your questions in the chat section, and Nikita will take it as the session goes. Like I said, you can reach us on social media and keep in touch about our sessions. So before I pass it on to Nikita Kohli, our moderator for today, a brief introduction about Nikita. Nikita is an experienced strategic intelligence and risk management professional with a demonstrated history of working with multiple corporates to mitigate short and long-term strategic and political risk. She's currently working as a senior intelligence analyst at MitKat Advisory Services, Predictive Risk Division, sorry about that, where Nikita's focus is on developing political risk assessments for corporates based in the Asia Pacific region. Nikita has previously worked for the Center for Land Warfare Studies, the think tank of the Indian Army, the Indian mission to the United Nations in Geneva, and Oxfam India. She has also worked as a consultant for and presented various papers before multiple different militaries, including the Indian and the US armies at the strategic level. So over to you, Nikita.
Thank you so much. And good morning and welcome to the Fireside Chat on evolution of countering and preventing violent extremism. I hope I'm loud and clear and we can have a good discussion today. So the focus on countering terrorism and terrorist techniques for the longest time has focused on two main prongs. The first is that we counter the terrorist groups by eliminating them and capturing and sentencing the terrorists. So we go step by step and go up, from different levels and go till the top. The other one is that we turn the smaller ones, the lower level operators, and we go towards those who are at the food chain and we turn them. So these are the two main ways. Either you bribe them or you kill and capture them. But as he kept dealing with different kinds of terrorists and the evolution from the time that we saw at the very beginning, and then with the evolution that we saw with LTTE and IRA and moving on towards Al-Qaeda, we saw that it was not just about capturing and eliminating the head of the terrorist group, but it was about the people themselves, the people who would actually be taking on and executing the attacks. And with that, we saw an evolution of the concept of countering violent extremism. This came somewhere around the beginning of the first Obama presidency, where we saw the first White House meeting on countering violent extremism, and when we really started to talk about this idea. We also saw this idea taking on rapidly around the world, and new organizations. One of the best ones which I have seen is the Paiman Trust in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa by Musarraf Kadim, where they are looking at countering the violent extremist tendencies and stopping the attack cycle before it even starts. But as we kept going ahead, it was not just enough to counter the terrorist narratives and the terrorist ideologies, but to prevent them from happening in itself. And from that time, we saw the plan of action for preventing violent extremism being announced in 2016 and going ahead globally. So we have had a lot of these pilot programs and different programs coming up across the world, different organizations, inclusive peace, inclusive security, and so many different peace organizations and NGOs dealing with this concept throughout the world. But how effective are they? Does it really work? And what exactly can be done with them? So today, to discuss all of these questions and a bit more, we have two great speakers with us. First, we have Lieutenant General Satish Dua, PVSM, UYSM, SM, VSM. He's a former chief of the Integrated Defense Staff and a phenomenal speaker and researcher. I've had the good privilege of listening to him at multiple occasions, and I believe that you will be very happy to hear about his thoughts and his experience as he has dealt with Kashmiri terrorists, as well as along the northeastern border. He is a counterterrorism specialist, and he was a co-commander 15 Corps in Kashmir, and he was one of the main and the most pivotal figures in planning and executing the surgical strikes in response to Uri. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you.
The second speaker that we'll have today is Noufal Abboud. He's the executive director at the Nordic Center for Conflict Transformation in Sweden and a board member of the Bolan Institute of Peace Innovation. He has been working in this field for over 15 years and has worked on conflict transformation programs in areas ranging from Morocco, Mali, and Niger. And he has worked on countering violent extremism and capacity building in areas such as Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Yemen, Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon. Welcome, Noufal. Great. So before we start, I wanted to divide this session into essentially two parts. I want to first look at the real life experience. Does it actually work? So I'm going to start with General Dua. General Dua, what do you think is the concept of PVE, CVE? Does it really work? Have you seen that really take into effect when you're working on the ground in Kashmir, in northeastern India? Can you really counter the violent extremism beyond just talking about countering the narratives in open media? Over to you, General Dua.
So Nikita, do you want me to make an opening statement? How much time do you give me? Or are you just going to keep asking us questions?
No, sir, I would like to hear your opening remarks, and this would be about 10 to 15 minutes.
All right, thank you.
Then we'll go ahead with some questions and answers.
It's just good to be on the right side of the moderator, so I should abide by your rules. Thank you, Nikita, and I thank Asian Pathfinders for inviting me on this very important topic, because this is something that is seen around the world in different forms, in different intensities, and it affects, it touches the lives of nearly everyone around the globe. World is becoming a violent place today. Well, violence has always been there, but in olden days, you saw wars between states, between kingdoms, for whatever reasons, whether it was for ideological reasons or for earthly reasons, pun intended, on earth. So, but off late, and when I say off late, let's talk about, let's say, 1 century. In the recent years, in the history of the world, 1 century is a small time. We are seeing a different form of violence. There are a lot of sub-regional aspirations. There is violence because of inequalities within a country, within a society, within a community. There are other forms of terrorism, like Nikita brought out. This term was coined, she said, during President Obama's time, violent extremism. But the fact is, terrorism, as we call it, also it was recognized as a very effective tool to draw attention to one's cause. It was taken as a very low cost option. If a few terrorists, a small terrorist group consisting of few terrorists can tie up disproportionately large uh, number of security forces in order to contain the violence that the terrorists perpetrate. So what we call today as non-state actors. So getting back to the point, when we talk of violent extremism, we are looking at the whole gamut. It could be secessionists, it could be sub-regional aspirations, or um, a fight against inequalities. You mentioned about now what I'm going to do as a practitioner. I'm going to take the example of one big issue that we have in India, take the example of that state and see how terrorism has actually risen in that state. Thereafter, the measures that the state employed, where did the state go wrong? And in the end, we'll talk about, I'll round off with what could we have done better? And then I will leave it to my friend from Sweden to talk about, and I'll listen to his thoughts very carefully, because then we will put into the matrix as to how, let's say, the things that I talk about in practice, taking an example, how do they fit into the thoughts that we hear from him? You mentioned about India has its own share of problems in the northeastern states earlier. But today, Jammu and Kashmir, we have a major problem for last 3 decades. And let's talk about how it started. So to gain or to glean for ourselves lessons that could help us in future. In Jammu and Kashmir, there is a foreign factor involved because there is a contiguous border with another country, and Pakistan has exploited a common religious cause and a porous border to fan trouble in Kashmir. With the humiliation in war, especially in 1971, it resorted to a low-cost, high-gain option of fomenting a death by 1,000 cuts. It was an open stated policy, fomenting violence in the valley. It led to gradual radicalization, fanning separatism, and politicization of the issue. They, to whatever extent they could, they also roped in other Islamic countries as well. I'm not going to go into details, but the audience here is well aware of what I'm talking about. So what did the state do? That is the Indian state. We kept fighting the manifestation of this militarily. Military and security forces were used. That would be the common response. That would be the natural response first. And the world over, we see this response as military, along with other security agencies, intelligence agencies, contains the violence perpetrated by terrorists. But what is required is an understanding that military cannot offer any solutions. Military can only curb, contain violence. There has to be a political outreach. In J&K also, I think the political outreach did not really keep pace with the security forces' action of containing violence. Wherever political outreach or steps towards resolution keep pace with them, it would be easier to find solutions. Though I do go back to the point of a foreign hand, it makes it that much more complicated. When another country is involved, there is a different dynamic involved between the two countries, and there is a different interest to keep the pot boiling, so to say. Uh, in the state, in the context of J&K, like I said, the political outreach towards resolution did not keep pace. In fact, I have often been saying that the state, and when I say state here, I'm talking of the center and the state put together. The state almost was content to outsource it to the army, to the security agencies. That is no solution. On the other hand, the other side, and when I say other, why do I use the word other side? The other side in this case are separatists, the terrorists, and the active moral, financial, and all kinds of support provided to aid by the neighboring country, Pakistan. The other side used this vacuum very well. The other side evolved with times. The other side control started having an upper hand in the narrative. When I say they evolved with times, there was terrorist violence, kinetic violence in the beginning. About decade and a half ago, taking good lessons from the Palestinian Intifada, the terrorist movement here changed tack. By that time, the security forces managed to get a better control over violence. The numbers of terrorists that were neutralized were large. The number of residual terrorists was less. So their strength, so to say, was on the wane. They took good lessons from the Intifada, and they took to protests by stone pelting, because stone pelting is seen as an unarmed protest rather than pick up weapons, but it is viciously violent. Then came the time when the stone pelting protesters would act as force multipliers during an operation when these terrorists were engaged with security forces. So instead of protests being separate and operations being kept separate, as was the case earlier, they started joining hands. In the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen that as security forces gained an upper hand in controlling terrorists and terrorist violence, both on the line of control and in the hinterland, in the valley, they started using social media to great effect. The terrorists use social media to radicalize, to mobilize, and to control the narrative. They created youthful icons like Burhan Wani. A lot of young minds, Kashmiri youth, were swayed because of a very adroit and deft use of social media. Now, let's cut to 2019. In 2019, in the state of J&K, India has, by an act of parliament, we diluted Article 370. The state was divided into 2 union territories, and now there is a direct rule from the center. This is, if I may be allowed to use this sentence, this has reduced the political ill effects considerably, and The administration has now created an outreach, while the security forces have brought down the violence levels to a great degree. There is firm control over the terrorist activities in the state. There is a ceasefire, which is thankfully holding out on the line of control with Pakistan. The administration is being efficient. There is active financial rejuvenation in the grassroots level in the state. Some political aspirations at the grassroots level are being met by panchayat elections, and that's for our friends from abroad. Those are elections at village level councils. And there has been very effective COVID response. So all in all, there is a better life for a common man, and return of the tourist. Return of the tourist is very important for the economy and the psyche of Kashmir, because it provides livelihood across a great multitude of or great cross section of the society. So what are the lessons in this narrative? I think we need to understand as to things that we could have done better. Could we have done some things better? Did we not see things shaping up to this form? When we talk of PVE, when we talk of CVE, countering violent extremism, there are two different aspects. One is controlling, and the second is resolving. When I spoke about security forces in J&K, reducing terrorist acts and the terrorist number of terrorists themselves in the J&K, that is controlling violence. The state should have then, and I talk of center and state together, the state should have stepped in with measures or steps towards resolving the problem and involving all stakeholders from the society, from the population. So when we talk of controlling and resolving, that forms up, or the countering of violent extremism comprises of these two. But when we talk of prevention, things that we could have done better, even in retrospect, if we look at it, did we have a good sense of it? Did we have good intelligence building up to the state of mind as to why this could happen? Even if Pakistan foments trouble for us, it is only possible if there is a good breeding ground, and a breeding ground is provided by simmering discontent. So perhaps we should have read the tea leaves better. True, because a foreign country is involved, we needed more involvement of center to reduce the space for foreign meddling. Another major thing you see, and I see I'm getting close to the time, so I will make one or two more thoughts and end it here, is the fact of information space. Today, information space is very important. My view is that information space has always been very important. Today, there are enablers and tools in everyone's hands. So that's what makes it so spontaneous that you don't have to wait for the next day's newspaper, or if you are in a remote place, the newspaper arrives after 2 days, where you could not catch the radio in earlier days. Today, everyone is wired and connected. We don't have to wait for the next day's telegrams. It is posted and reposted. A sensational news is posted and reposted millions of times in a matter of minutes. Therefore, the information space is something which is so very important in many facets in our life, but relevant to the topic. It is a force multiplier here. Information space cannot be left vacant. Narrative has to be, I won't use the word control, but one must put out their own narrative. And that is something the terrorists, the separatists, the other organizations, the intelligence agencies have been able to do that much better than our narrative. We need to have a national narrative around it, because people will believe what is put out there. And we need to have an efficient administration that delivers. No politics in this. The moment we start politicking, we become weak. So all in all, if we have to get into prevention of prevention of violent extremism, we require a whole of government approach. We require a lot of synergy. Fortunately, better enablers and tools are available today if there is a will to approach this problem with all of government approach without any politics and vested interests. I'd like to end my remarks here, and we'll take on any questions after that. Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you, General Dua. That was a brilliant opening remarks, as I would say. We had so much to learn in these just 15 minutes that you have managed to put so much into that. Especially like the idea that you have talked about the information space and bringing in the changes that we are seeing even currently, and the talks about the entire whole of government approach required rather than just a simple military analysis. But General, I wanted to talk to you about like a couple of points that you have mentioned in your speech, if I may. The first thing that you mentioned is that we needed to read the tea leaves better, especially when Pakistan started interfering into the matters of India. But when you're looking at that, and we also now see other factors and other countries interfering in a lot of other, let's just say, in other countries through state-sponsored or state-supported attacks and terrorist groups. In those situations, beyond just saying that we need a particular response to that as well. In those situations, do you think, as a military commander on the ground, will you be able to do the countering of violent extremism and preventing of violent extremism by reaching out to the people? Is that possible at all?
So, Nikita, my view is that that's a good question. But my view is that when I said we should have read the tea leaves better, is a time when we know that Pakistan was trying to use a common cause by virtue of contiguity of borders and commonality of religion in order to foment trouble for us for the reasons of their humiliation in 1971. Then we should also have been very careful in terms of ensuring that we don't provide grouse a good breeding ground for them to capitalize on. They would make it. They were making forays. We know that in 1965 war, they expected that when they would attack, the valley would rise up in revolt. We know that, and then it didn't happen. So what happened? What changed between 1965 and now? Why was Valley large sections rising up in revolt? So, for instance, everyone knows that the 1987 elections was the turning point. So we should have when the rigging of their elections is something that it cuts across party lines. There was some issues in the elections that. So that seemed to be the tipping point. In 1988 onwards, this terrorist violence erupted in the open. So that's what I meant. Between these years, if we know that they were smarting, if we know that they're looking for opportunities, I think it was doubly incumbent on the governments to put political differences aside, to put other interests aside, to make sure that we don't end up in a situation that they've been able to use this. by that time, in the Middle East, we were seeing Black September and so many other terrorist organizations coming up. We were seeing the fight between the Middle East and the Israeli forces and Mossad and Israeli intelligence agencies. We were seeing as to what had happened in South America. So that was the time for us to sort of, we don't have to, wise people learn from others' experience. We don't have to let it hit us. And it happened.
And
I
that's
hope I answer your question somewhat.
Yes, so that's, I think, a good point, that we need to know where in the attack cycle we are. So it's just at the time when people are getting radicalized, when that interference is starting, that's when we need to counter it, right?
Yes. We need to, if people are getting radicalized, they're getting radicalized only because we are unable to grab that mind space. We need to create a national narrative. It is in absence of that they are getting radicalized.
And that brings me to my second question that I wish to ask you, General. So you mentioned a couple of things. One, that we need a national narrative, and that we need to, that the army can only be containing violence. At the same time, you mentioned that we are in the information space where everyone is connected. So now, even if you're looking just beyond, say, the Kashmiri terrorists that we're looking at, or say the northeastern terrorism, we're also seeing a lot of the interconnectivity, say, within community radio networks of the Naxal movement in central India. Now, how come when you're looking at this policy of BAM, the winning hearts and minds, that has been a narrative that has been in position. We are working and we're building, the army's building schools, we are building a lot of things, we're doing a lot of things in all of these communities actually. So how does that narrative really work? Is it that effective? Or are we still, is the military still, despite these narratives, containing and limiting itself to just countering that violence as it happens at that moment and not being able to go beyond it? How do you see that happening?
Thank you, Nikita. That is a very good question, something which is dear to my heart. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about it. And maybe there are lessons in this for everyone. Operation Sadbhavna is the name of this, we call it operation. I mean, the military habit of calling everything an operation. So it's a project.
Operation Goodwill for
Yes.
everyone else, that translates into Operation Goodwill.
Exactly. I was just going to say that for those who don't understand Hindi, it would translate into goodwill. Thank you. So since the security forces led by the army are always seen as the one with a gun in the hand, a soldier is, you imagine a soldier with gun, that's his job, that's his profession. Sometimes in trying to contain violence, neutralize terrorists who are perpetrating violence, there are innocent lives that are either lost in the crossfire, and pun intended, literally in the crossfire. So it is not necessary to lose life. Several times it would happen. Like I have been on operations, when you go into a village, you are in that village because the terrorists have sort of gotten into a house. At the end of it, for those 2 days or 3 nights or whatever time it takes for us to flush out those terrorists, all the villagers are inconvenienced. Their cattle cannot be fed if they are in the house because they just can't go inside. They cannot go to their fields for throwing and tilling because they can't move out. There is a belt of firing going on, and we just try and take them away to safe distances. There is also the question of a few hostages who are caught up inside the house. So, sorry, I don't have to describe it so graphically, but what I'm trying to tell you is that everyone is inconvenience, but it's a necessary evil. How do we not inconvenience them if we want to keep them safe? So the security forces, the armies, realize that the villagers, they don't understand all this. They see as army having imposed hardships on them. So therefore, the army started to show its softer side. And also, because we are there at the remotest of the corners of villages, there is a place with only 3 huts. No one goes there, not even administration. We are there. So what happens in such remote areas? Army decided to set aside some effort, financial and otherwise investment effort, invested ourselves into ameliorating their problem, which has got nothing to do with the army. All right, there is a stream which requires a footbridge. It saves a woman who fills water for her, saves 10 kilometers of walking with a pot on her head. So things like this. Or there is a school where the girls don't have a toilet. So in a remote village. So small steps like this started affecting small groups of people in remote areas. So that is the kind of goodwill we tried to create. You mentioned schools, then slowly army started running schools because the villagers would tell us, because army schools really were run efficiently. There was good teaching being imparted, unlike some of the government schools in remote areas where teachers just wouldn't turn up. So army started doing a lot of this. When I was a corps commander, I decided we must look into, or engage with the youth mind space more than others, because it is these young children, young minds, teenagers who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, or if not handled well, the terrorists of tomorrow. So I opened, when I was a corps commander, we opened 66 youth clubs. Because they don't, you and I, our children go out, they chill out in their clubs and their bars, they don't have any place to go. And if you don't give them anything, idle minds, devil's workshop. So we organized youth clubs where they had internet facilities, library, gymnasium, and it's just a place to hang out and enjoy many other sports. So many people came forward to help the youth clubs. All right, so I will wind up to say that army started increasing its activities and it paid very handsome dividends, much beyond the amount of investment we made. But it is not army's job. And that's what I said. I said it once in between. The state was content to outsource it to the army. You cannot outsource this to the army. The state should be doing this. Okay. We have meager amount of resources and funds for it. So I suppose if we did such things also at the level of state, at a much bigger level, and reach out to the people, army would surely be willing to help where they can, rather than leave it to the army.
That's a good point, sir. And with that, I would like to turn to Noufal. Noufal, you have been working on these capacity building projects and countering violent extremism projects throughout a lot of parts of Middle East and North and African countries. So, like looking at your experience, do you see that these activities really help? So, I would ask you to start with the opening remarks, please. Yeah. How did you, please delve onto experience. We like to hear these stories. I think that's something that a lot of people will be able to understand these better with. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nikita, for having me. Thank you, Asian Pathfinder, Pallavi. Thank you, General Dua, for your wonderful opening statements and presentation. We learned so much from this. This is a field where we learn from. And every day there is something new. If we look at violent extremism and terrorism as a virus, we have observed that it has been shifting and changing over time, even from the last decade to today. Just few events, for example, that happened in the last decades have surprised us. And we expected something and something else has happened. Last decade, and this is perhaps the time limitation of this talk, is about the last decade from 2011 to 2021. 2011 already, so many things have happened in this field. You have the killing of Osama bin Laden that happened in 2011. You have the twin terrorist attack in Norway, perpetrated by the far-right violent extremist Anders Breivik, which killed 77 people. You have also the killing of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya in 2011. And you have the withdrawal of the US troops from Iraq, thinking that, that they fixed Iraq. 2021, you have the unexpected again. It's the negotiation between Taliban and the US and for the preparation for the US to withdraw from Afghanistan. And what we have all of that what we can say about all of that. It's a lot of things to say, and I know that for this chat the time is very limited, but I would like to make at least 2 or 3 points as lessons learned from all of this. You know, before the decade, this decade that we are talking about, before the 2011, it was already a strong discourse and narrative on how to fight terrorists and how to wage a war against terrorism and terrorist attack. It was within the framework of the use of force and violence under the Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. And within the framework, which was new, which is preemptive self-defense, is that we don't wait for the terrorists to come to us, we'll go and we kill the terrorists. That narrative has shifted after 2010, and we have seen that the extremism in itself, violent extremism in itself, and terrorism have changed. That these terrorists, you know, have been, you know, accommodating themselves to the new strategies, and we have seen a new kind of violent extremism. And this was, for example, when everybody was focusing on Al-Qaeda, all of a sudden you have ISIL, you have Daesh that emerged in Iraq and Syria with a claim of territorial claims and challenging the nation states in general. After that, now we're talking about returnees and repatriation of terrorists back home, and we still don't agree with that. Maybe I will just put these 3 points out there and we can discuss them a little later. One of, you know, the changing approach to violent extremism and how we can counter it and prevent it is linked to how violent extremism and terrorism itself have changed during the last decade. And I can tell some of the lessons that we have learned from the last decade is actually the counter-terrorism strategies and the countering violent extremism, the way we have done it before, has been questioned and have been demonstrated that it doesn't work fully, that something must be wrong with it, something has shifted with it. And one of the questions about it is that we have seen a reduced number of terrorist attacks, but what we have observed is an expansion of terrorism around the world. There is at least 71 countries that have been touched by terrorism and violent extremism. And that tells us that there is perhaps a decentralization of terrorism around the world. And the counterterrorism strategies until today has not fully succeeded to stop this virus. The second point that I would like to make in here is in relation to the peace building field. One of the lessons also from the peace building field is that we have been seeing that the peace building field, instead of filling up the gap of the counterterrorism and the CVE field, which focuses on crisis, we have seen the peace building field in itself focusing on crisis and leaving a vacuum out there. When peace building field is focusing on crisis, it impoverishes the field of peace building. And we have seen a new peace building organizations that have been emerged, and I think it's what you call it, the new peace building, the new wave of peace building organizations that have observed this gap within the peace building field. One of the challenges in the peace building field is that most of the tools of peace building have emerged during the Cold War, with the focus on addressing a crisis, and at that time was actually preventing a nuclear war. And the ultimate goal was actually to come up to a state of non-violence. But today we speak about sustainable peace, and non-violence is not enough. More and more now we have seen peace building organizations saying that non-violence in itself is not sustainable without a full realization of human rights, justice, and other fields. We can discuss this a little bit more in details, but my third point that I would like to make is that we have been guided by the saying that says we need to think globally and act locally. What we have learned in the field of countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism, actually, we have to start thinking about the other way around. We have to start thinking locally and act globally. Why? Because when we go through the idea of to what extent we have succeeded in dealing with this violent extremism in terms of countering it or preventing it, when we think globally, I said, there is a feeling of despair and pessimism. And we don't want to start with that. We have to be able to acknowledge that globally we have not succeeded. But when we think locally, is actually, we have seen so many successful initiatives in India, in Morocco, in Yemen, even in the middle of wars and crisis, there are some community and some national experiences that have actually brought a lot of hope that we can actually deal with this phenomenon at the local level, at the national level. What I would like to bring here is actually the acknowledge, first of all, that at the global level, we have not succeeded to deal with violent extremism. But locally and nationally, we have. There are some very interesting and important experiences. Unfortunately, they are not shared. And at the global level, this field of violent extremism have been, in a way or another, considered as being a field of experts. We have put so much burden on experts to resolve this problem. Unfortunately, they didn't. We need to make these experts a little bit feel comfortable to share also what doesn't work in this field. We have not seen many of the experts that says actually that we have not really succeeded in dealing with violent extremism because of these reasons. We just, for example, the last, one of the more scientific studies in terms of evaluating approaches and looking into violent extremism in general was the global terrorism index, for instance. And even that is not too far behind. It's still quite of new. The global peace index is the same thing. And what the global peace index tells us, for instance, is it says from 2018 until today that the tension, the violence, and the conflict that occurred decades ago are still ongoing. And actually new set of violence and tension have emerged as such. Last decade also taught us what wars are about and how we can fight a war on terrorism. Wars are no longer has three components, which is population, military, and government. I go with the book on transformation of war of Martin van Greveld, who wrote it in 1991, who actually challenged and criticized these three components. He says it's too narrow. The new kind of wars are fought by groups, by guerrillas, and by what we can call it empowered individuals. Violent extremism and terrorism is just as that. It's about these groups, it's about individuals, and I think we have to move away from the idea that a terrorist or violent extremist is kind of one model. There are several, and this is one of the lessons learned. There are several elements inside a terrorist group in general, and this is what we have learned. At least there are 3 or 4 categories that are involved in terrorism for different reasons. There are the initiators of this idea of terrorism. I'm talking about the heads of terrorists, those who put the concept of terrorism. I'm talking about Osama bin Laden, Abu Bakr Baghdadi, Abu Bakr Shekau, and so forth like that. Those, seriously, we don't know exactly where they come from, how they are financed, how they have emerged. They died, for example, but we don't have any information about that. It's a purely security approach. There is the other categories is it's the mercenaries. And these people, they will infiltrate inside groups. They will say that we're going for jihad and so forth like that, but their purpose is much more about making profit. They are paid by other states, and they infiltrate into groups. And for them, it's about looting, it's about making money. We have seen this in the Middle East, we have seen this in Africa, with interference of, for example, of companies, security companies such as Wagner Company, who are a war-making company, and who hires mercenaries, pay them, and they make war somewhere else. With these people, it's very hard to say that we are going to de-radicalize them and work with them towards ideological framework. These people have to be within the framework of the nexus between terrorism and crimes. The third category
I'll just ask you to please summarize within the next few minutes so that we can progress question and answers, if that would be possible. Thank you.
For sure. So just two categories. The other categories are the people that have been radicalized because they have been influenced by the narrative of extremists and having a new state where they can emerge and progress better. And the third categories are the returnees who will never return home, but they are actually migrants going somewhere else for conflict zones. So I will stop right here, and then I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Noufal. That was really a great presentation. So I think that I really especially like the idea that how we have transferred from conflict, from peace building, peacekeeping to the newer concept of conflict transformation. There's been a lot that has been left behind. We're changing, we're evolving, but there are some major gaps that we are still seeing. Apart from that, the three categories of people that we need to also look at in conflict, I think that is a very good concept. So between these things, I would like to ask you a couple of questions as well. So I would actually, given your experience, I would like to ask about places like, say, Yemen or Western Sahara. So you are seeing a lot of different types of conflict over there. And at various different points, people were ready to engage. Right? So even still now in Western Sahara, people, they're not as violent as seen in a lot of other parts of the world. There are some, of course, different sporadic incidents of violence, but they haven't taken up arms in that manner. So at what is the condition of engagement for countering violent extremism or for an engagement in this? We had a paper that came out many years ago from Swiss Peace that talked about negotiability when they actually believe it will happen. Do you really think that there is such a point of negotiability when negotiations are actually viable? Please give us your example, like say, for example, based on Yemen, Western Sahara, and other areas that you have seen these examples from.
Yeah, there are very different conflicts. I would like to mention the conflict in the southern Moroccan territories in what is called the Western Sahara, which is within the Moroccan sovereignty, and it's one of the conflict that is very much misunderstood globally. There was a lot of advocates against the sovereignty of Morocco regarding that territory. But one of the things that has nothing to do, first of all, with terrorism, except the fact that it allows the infiltration of some terrorists from other places, because that is most of the people who are within the territory, who are originally from the territory of the Western Sahara, Moroccan Sahara, are actually in the refugee camps or in camps in Algeria, and they're not allowed to leave to come in. So whenever there is a stirring regarding a conflict in a territory, that opens up lines for other extremists to be able to infiltrate. Morocco has been suffering from that, from the infiltration of terrorists from different sides. You know that Morocco is the land that liaises between Africa and Europe, and people will come to Morocco for different reasons. And that is why Morocco has been one of the leading countries in terms of counterterrorism, but also from rehabilitation, reintegration of terrorists. We have a program in Morocco that is a quite groundbreaking program. It's on reconciliation with the people who have been convicted by the terrorist laws in Morocco, the prisoners. So the Moroccan authorities, along with religious authorities, human rights authorities, and so forth like that, they work with these terrorists inside the prisons, and they go through programs, and by which at the end, when there are indications of their de-radicalization and their preparedness to be good citizens back, most of them have been pardoned by the King of Morocco and have been returned to the communities. Now we're talking about post-carceral, post-prison rehabilitation and so forth like that. In Yemen, it's completely different things. In Yemen, you have, it's the hub of all kind of terrorist groups and who is suffering from that are the civilians, as a matter of fact. And we can see also of those categories of extremists, and I'm talking about different groups. I'm talking about mercenaries, and I'm talking about people leaving the country and humanitarian disasters, occurring there. So what is the best way to do it? I don't think like General Dua said, is not only a matter of the military. The military cannot resolve this alone. This is a matter of everyone. This is a matter of the military, the international community, and also, and most importantly, the regional collaboration and the civil society organizations. All of this, and when we're talking about solutions, we have to keep in mind that when we're proposing solutions, we have to keep in mind people that are not around the table. And I'm talking here about women, I'm talking about ethnic groups, and I'm talking about several a group that need to be around the table, not the way it has been done when negotiating with Taliban, for instance, because the way it has been done, it doesn't indicate that peace will be sustained and people will be happy without them being involved and being excluded. So I hope I answered the question.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. So I'm now going to take some questions from the audience. The way I'm looking at it, we have till now two main groups of questions that are coming in. So I'm going to club them together. So the first set is looking at the ideologies. So I'm just going to read them out, parts of them at least. So the first question reads that, is it viable to view the issue as a spectrum with extremist ideas, beliefs, and ideology at one end, and extremist violence at the other end? So we're looking at, are we countering the views and ideologies expressed with that? So the same way, another question continues with this, which is that, what is the role of religious heads in the narrative? Again, we're focusing on the narratives. Are we seeing a differentiation between narratives and violence? And are we countering only the narratives till now, or are we able to counter the ideologies in themselves? I think we have one more related to this again, about the ideologies. Are we able to, and this is the final part I would ask both of you to take into consideration, as how much are we able to pick, and how much are we able to counter this over social media? So ideologies versus active action. What are we countering? Where are we countering it? And how effective has it been? Just one minute response from both of you. General Dua, we'll start with you, please.
So we are active actions, if I get your questions right, active actions on one side and ideologies on the other, right?
Yes.
Right.
Which are we countering? And where are we countering it? Are we countering it effectively across the situations, or should we focus on social media?
So to my mind, this will perhaps be different in different settings. And ideologies, I mean, to counter an ideology is a huge task. Countering a particular activity is easier. It's almost like, this is a military action, this is a kinetic sort of an action. And as far as countering ideology is concerned, it takes a lot of doing, because you would have to make your own narrative. You would have to also respond, not as in question answer form, but respond to the ideology being propagated by the other side. So to my mind, both have to go hand in hand. And while one is more direct, that is countering activities, but countering ideologies will again require a very comprehensive approach from several stakeholders. I'd like to leave it there. But before you go to Noufal, I just want to say this to you, Nikita. Whenever if you have the time, I want to make a 1 minute comment later on
Yes,
one
so
of the.
we'll be having another closing remarks, of course.
Okay.
So Noufal, again, a 1 minute response. Where are we looking at for violent extremism? Are we looking at ideologies? Are we looking at actions? And which is the space that we should be focusing on?
First of all, one of the lessons also that we have learned is that extremism is a complex. People go to violent extremism at least for three elements. One is to fight a war, which is within the framework of direct violence, or structural violence, but people are living in socioeconomic hardship that they want to do anything to move on. And the third element is about cultural violence. What I mean by cultural violence, and this is within framework of Johan Galton's theory of violence, cultural violence is anything that justifies violence and violent extremism in this case. Be it religious, be it religion, be it ideology, and so forth. What we have learned in rehabilitation, reintegration of former terrorists is that when you provide these terrorists with practical things that change their lives for the better, it seems that it works more than working with them in terms of convincing them ideologically to the opposite. So I would say that we need to focus on more practical things than ideology. It just, even on when some terrorists, show that ideologically he became better, we don't trust them, yet. But when we give them practical things, socioeconomic things, and so forth like that, to change their lives for the better, it seems that it works more. So I would not focus too much on ideology, but I would focus on the socioeconomic and structural issues more.
That's a good point. Leopard doesn't change, it prints that off.
Yes.
So with that, I think we'll start with the closing remarks. 1 minute closing remarks. General Dua, we'll start with you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Noufal for his excellent presentation as well. I'm going to take a leaf for that 1 minute. I'm going to take a remark made by Noufal about global and local. Why we have not succeeded globally. He actually compared and drew an analogy with called terrorism like a virus, which has been shifting and changing with time. Today, the world is actually combating a virus. The world and most countries are cooperating in trying to combat that virus. I think similarly, we need to understand that terrorism is today it is affecting one country and tomorrow it could affect another one in the same form or not, or maybe a different form or different strain, like as if a virus of the virus. We need to cooperate more. And I have made this suggestion a couple of years ago. I was at a conference in Washington where 77 countries were represented, but all military heads. And I made this point, and I just make this an end. We have an Interpol where all the police organizations of all the member countries, and most countries are members. I think it's time that we need to have an organization like that to deal with terrorism, where we would require, and to deal with terrorism, knowledge is power. Having knowledge about terrorist activities, their identities, their ideologies, their funding, fund flows, all these kind of activities and more knowledge about this, if we can just share this much of knowledge and be actively assisting each other, because terrorists take advantage of the fact that one country's laws are not applicable to the other and they would move around this side. You mentioned a bit about mercenaries. So I feel a lot could be gained if we try to either have a convention or actively start helping each other to combat this menace globally. Thank you.
So global cooperation is required for countering violent extremism, preventing it, as well as countering terrorism at all levels. Wonderful conclusion, General Dua. Thank you so much. Noufal, your concluding remarks, please.
Yes, I think it's in the same sense, that we have something, for example, it's called the GCTF, the Global Counterterrorism Forum, where countries, and Morocco is a part of it, and the Netherlands and other countries, where they come and they discuss counterterrorism. Perhaps, we need more people to join in such kind of forums, including India, including Pakistan, including a lot of other countries, to try to find a way on how we can talk to each other. Morocco has, for example, dealt with several conflicts within the dialogue framework, within proposing autonomy, for example, for the Western Sahara, Moroccan Sahara. Proposing more collaborations within the framework of the European Union and the African Union. Morocco has joined, so forth like that. There are things. However, one of the things is that when we talk about collaboration between states, it has to be done from a framework of symmetry and not asymmetry. It's not within the framework of have strong states and smaller states who have to be just responding to what the bigger states are doing. We have to look into some kind of symmetry in the collaboration, taking into account the local and specificities of each nation and country. There are, like I said, wonderful experiences at the local level and community level that need to be empowered. They need to be shared at the global level. I hope that this forum of collaboration also highlights what's going on peace building at the community level in each country, what works and what doesn't work as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this has been a great session. We started by looking at the idea of counterterrorism, where we're looking at exclusively eliminating the people, especially focusing on the targets at the heads, such as UBL, to moving to different people and countering the violent ideologies. We have talked about various different concepts of foreign hand interference, about different local communities and how to engage by looking at conflict transformation rather than just peace building and peacekeeping. I think this has been a fantastic talk where we have come to the conclusion that what is really required at today's stage and age, after a decade has passed since these concepts really started, is what we call a symmetry of collaboration, as Noufal said, between all the countries to target the menace of terrorism altogether. I'm so sorry that we could not ask all of the questions that are there. I'm sure the two organizers here, Pallavi and Shreyas, would certainly try and get back to you on this, and we will talk with the speakers after that to make sure that they get back to you on these questions. Thank you so much for an engaging discussion and joining us today with General Dua and Noufal Abboud. Thank you so much, and over to you, Pallavi and Shreyas, for concluding the session.
Nikita, I think you did a very good conclusion for us, so I don't have to say much. Thank you, General Dua and Noufal, definitely for this very engaging and very, I think, enriching learning experience for all of us. And obviously, thank you, Nikita, for that excellent moderation and keeping this such an engaging discussion. And I know Shreyas has put the link in the chat section for our next session, which is a panel discussion on Thursday. So we do look forward to you joining us, and have a good weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.